All right. So, you know how we always end up talking about like all the crazy power struggles in Dune?
Oh, yeah.
Well, this deep dive, we're going to go past all the obvious players, you know, the Atreides,
Right.
Harkonnens, even the Emperor himself.
Mm-hmm.
We're checking out this article. It's actually in Spanish. It's from this website called 3D Juegos.
Okay.
And it makes a really cool argument about the Spacing Guild.
Interesting.
They don't really get a lot of attention, but
Yeah.
they're like the puppet masters, you know?
Yeah.
Behind the scenes.
Pulling the strings.
And this article, it just gave me a whole new way to think about how they use their power.
I'm intrigued. What's so fascinating to me about the Spacing Guild is that their power is so subtle. You know,
Yeah.
It's not like they've got armies
Right.
or they control a ton of planets.
Right.
But because they're the only ones who can do interstellar travel.
Right.
I mean, they're the most important force in the whole Imperium.
It's true. Like in a galaxy where spice is the most valuable thing.
No, absolutely.
If you control how it gets moved around,
Oh, yeah.
you have so much power.
Totally.
It's more than just, you know, getting it from point A to point B.
Right.
Like you're deciding who gets rich, who gets resources, even information.
It's true. And the article really digs into this whole economic side of the guild's monopoly.
Okay.
Their argument is that because the guild controls all space travel,
Uh-huh.
they basically set the prices for the entire empire.
Wow.
Think about it. You're some noble house.
Okay.
You're on some backwater planet.
Yeah.
You've got spice to sell.
Yeah.
You're stuck with whatever prices the guild decides.
And their schedule.
Exactly.
So they're not just a transport company. They're like the central bank,
Yeah.
the regulators, like a giant logistics company all at once.
All rolled into one.
And that kind of economic power, that means they've got to have political power too.
Absolutely. The article makes this point that the guild really wants everything to be stable politically.
Makes sense.
Any kind of chaos.
Yeah.
Any fighting that messes up the spice trade that hurts them directly.
Which is kind of ironic, right?
How so?
Well, they need spice for their navigators.
Right. Those mutated humans who can see the safe paths through space,
Exactly.
but they can only do that because of the spice.
Right. So they need it.
Yeah.
But that also makes them super vulnerable.
It's true that vulnerability is a key part of this article.
Yeah.
It highlights how the guild is always like walking on a tightrope,
Oh,
trying to keep things stable, but also protecting their own interests.
right. Because if spice stops flowing, they're in trouble.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But they also can't let any one group get too strong.
Because then that group could challenge their monopoly.
Precisely.
It's like they're playing 4D chess.
Uh-huh. Like
Always thinking many moves ahead,
Yeah.
trying to figure out the consequences before they even happen.
They got to weigh those short-term profits against the long-term risks.
And I've been doing this for centuries.
They have. That's why they're so good at it. The article even says the guild thinks in terms of generations.
Not just years.
No, they've seen empires rise and fall,
Wow. Yeah.
and they've learned how to survive any political situation.
That is intense. Okay, so let's talk movies for a second.
Sure.
It's interesting how the Spacing Guild is shown in both David Lynch's Dune
Uh-huh.
and Denis Villeneuve's Dune.
Yeah.
Like in Lynch's version from 1984,
Yeah.
the Navigators are these like kind of gross giant beings
Yeah.
floating in these tanks of spice.
Super visual.
Yeah, really intense imagery.
Lynch really went for that body horror feel,
Yeah.
showing how addictive spice can be.
Right, you really see the toll it takes on them.
Absolutely.
But then in Villeneuve's movies, the guild is way more subtle.
Much more understated.
Yeah, you see them a little bit like at the ceremony on Arrakis, but they're mostly just kind of in the background.
It seems like Villeneuve is going for a different approach,
Okay.
focusing more on the politics
Oh.
and Paul Atreides' rise to power.
Yeah.
The guild's influence is definitely there,
Mm-hmm.
but it's more implied.
Working behind the scenes.
Right.
I kind of wish they were more prominent.
I understand that.
I'm hoping maybe they'll get more attention in the Dune Messiah adaptation.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see on that one.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Okay, but getting back to the article,
Yeah.
what I found really interesting was how they connected the Spacing Guild to our world.
Oh, yeah. That's one of the brilliant things about Dune.
Yeah.
Even though it's this crazy far future story,
Mm-hmm.
the themes are so relevant to our lives today.
It's true. Like, think about it. The Spacing Guild controls spice,
Yeah.
and they use that to influence politics.
Right.
It's not that different from how countries in the real world use oil or rare earth minerals to get what they want.
Yeah, it's a really good parallel.
It makes you realize the struggle for power, the manipulation of resources, wanting to control things over long periods.
Right.
These are things that happen everywhere.
Timeless.
And by understanding how the Spacing Guild works in Dune, it can actually help us understand those things in our own world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like Dune is this giant thought experiment.
Okay.
Exploring what happens when too much power gets concentrated in one place.
Yeah.
And how control works in such a complex system.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And the Spacing Guild is like the perfect example of a group that seems harmless,
Yeah.
but actually has a ton of influence.
Pulling strings from the shadows?
It's kind of scary when you think about it.
It is a bit.
But also super interesting. So
Definitely.
we've talked about the guild's power.
Their dependence on spice.
And how they think long term.
Their strategies.
But what about how they deal with the other big players in the Dune universe?
Oh, yeah. How do they manage all that imperial politics?
That's where things get even more interesting.
Buckle up.
Because the guild, even though they act neutral,
Right.
they're always involved in these complicated alliances.
And manipulations.
Yeah, they're playing the game.
Oh, for sure.
It's like walking a tightrope.
Okay.
Trying to keep everyone happy.
Yeah.
The noble houses, the Bene Gesserit, the Emperor.
Don't forget the Freemen.
Oh, yeah, them too.
Keeping everyone balanced.
Exactly. And the 3D Schwega's article, they do a great job of explaining how the guild deals with all these different groups.
They do. For instance, they point out how the guild has this long history of working with the Bene Gesserit.
Oh, right. The Bene Gesserit with their breeding program and their plans that span centuries.
Exactly.
They're another group that's playing the long game.
For sure.
What's interesting is that the guild knows how influential the Bene Gesserit are.
Yeah. And how good their intelligence network is.
So they share information,
Uh.
work together sometimes, but...
But there's always that little bit of suspicion.
Right.
Both groups know the other one could be a threat.
So they benefit from each other,
Yeah.
but they're also a little paranoid.
Makes sense. It's a delicate balance.
Totally.
Yeah.
And then there's the Landsrod.
The council of all the noble houses.
Right, the ones who actually run the Imperium.
The guild needs them for legitimacy, to keep their monopoly legal.
Right.
But they also see the noble houses as kind of unstable.
Which, let's be real, they are.
Oh, absolutely. They're always fighting for more power.
The whole plot of Dune starts because the Harkonnens and the Atreides are fighting.
Exactly.
And the guild knows that those power struggles, they can mess up spice production.
And hurt their profits.
So they're constantly trying to keep the Landsrod in check, making sure no one house gets too powerful.
Keeping the balance.
It's like they're playing whack-a-mole with the noble houses.
Oh, love it. Always putting out fires, trying to maintain order.
And then there's the Emperor.
Ah, yes, the big guy.
On the surface, it looks like the guild respects his authority.
They transport his troops, enforce his rules.
But the article argues that the guild sees him as just another player.
Another piece on the board.
Albeit a powerful one.
Very powerful.
So they're loyal, but only up to a point.
Exactly. Their main concern is staying alive. And protecting their own long-term interests.
Oh. Okay, so if the Emperor starts doing things that threaten the Imperium...
Or the flow of spice.
They'd go against him.
I think they would.
That's pretty intense.
It is. They're in a unique position.
Oh, so?
They can literally stop all space travel.
Oh, wow.
That would cripple the Empire.
So they have a lot of leverage.
Even the Emperor has to listen to them.
It's like they're the ultimate kingmakers.
The power behind the throne.
And now we come to the most interesting relationship of all.
Which is?
The guild's interactions with the Freemen.
Ah, the desert warriors who control Arrakis.
And therefore, the spice.
The source of it all.
This is where you really see how practical the guild is.
Okay.
They know the Freemen are a powerful force.
They control the spice production.
But they're also unpredictable.
And potentially dangerous.
Yeah. The Freemen aren't exactly known for following the rules.
No, they're not big fans of bureaucracy.
Or interior law.
So the guild has to be careful.
Right. They need the Freemen to keep producing spice.
Yeah.
But they can't let them get too powerful.
Or disrupt everything.
It's like they're trying to tame a wild beast.
In a way, yes. And how they do it is fascinating.
Okay, I'm listening.
It's a mix of diplomacy, economic incentives, and subtle threats.
So how does that work?
They give the Freemen technology. They pay them a lot for the spice.
Okay.
But they also make it clear
What?
that they won't tolerate anything that threatens their monopoly.
Or the stability of the empire.
Exactly.
So they need the Freemen, but they're also kind of afraid of them.
Yeah, and that fear probably plays a big role in how they react to Paul Atreides.
Right, because he's not just controlling the spice, he is the Freeman mystique.
Their messiah, their leader.
Exactly. And that gives him a level of influence that's totally new to the guild.
They've never encountered anything like it before.
So how do they deal with that? This article suggests that the Guild might see Paul's rule as the ultimate test.
The ultimate test of their long-term strategy.
Right, for centuries they've maintained power through manipulation.
Subtle influence, pulling strings in the background.
Right, but Paul, he changes everything.
He does.
He's this force of nature, a charismatic leader who's got the Fremen's complete loyalty.
He can't be controlled or manipulated easily.
So the Guild's usual tricks, they might not work.
They've got to find a new way to deal with him.
Either bring him on their side.
Or find a way to undermine him, if it comes to that.
The article says that the Guild would be really worried about Paul destabilizing the Empire.
He's young, idealistic, and has that religious fervor.
Right, which could lead to fanaticism.
Exactly. Remember that whole jihad thing?
Oh, yeah, the Fremen following Paul.
Launching a galaxy-wide holy war.
That's definitely not the kind of stability the Guild likes.
Not at all. So they're stuck.
In a dilemma.
They need the spice that Paul controls.
But his rule could threaten the very order they depend on.
It's a tough spot to be in.
So what do? What does the Guild do when they can't control a leader?
Good question. The article suggests a few possibilities.
Like what?
One option is they try to bring Paul into the fold.
Okay, make him one of them.
Show him that they actually have the same goals.
Convince him that the Guild's monopoly benefits everyone.
Including the Fremen.
Maybe even offer him some power.
The seat at the table.
But wouldn't that hurt their position?
Potentially.
They've always acted neutral.
Above the fray.
Right, so wouldn't that compromise that?
It might. That's the risk they have to consider.
So do they try to control Paul from within?
Even if it means giving up some of their own power.
Or do they risk fighting him?
Which could disrupt the spice flow.
And throw the galaxy into chaos.
Exactly. It's a choice between bad and worse.
Those are some tough choices. And the article doesn't ignore the more devious options either.
What do you mean?
They suggest the Guild might resort to more sneaky methods.
Like sabotage.
Yeah, or assassination.
Wow.
Or even supporting other groups that oppose Paul's rule.
It's a chilling thought.
It is, but it fits with their history.
True. They've shown they'll do whatever it takes.
Protect their own interests.
Even if it means sacrificing lives.
Or manipulating entire societies.
It's a dark side to their power.
This is where it gets really interesting to me.
How so?
Because knowing what we know now about why the Guild does things...
And how they do them?
It changes how you see what happens in Dune Messiah.
Oh, I agree. It's like reading the book with fresh eyes.
You start to see the Guild's influence everywhere.
And the little manipulations, the hints of conspiracy, the changes in power.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, were they behind the plot against Paul?
Did they help his sister Alia rise to power?
Were they the ones controlling everything?
Those are questions fans have debated for years.
And then this article gives us a new way to think about the Guild's motives.
And their possible role in all of it.
It reminds us that in the world of Dune, things are rarely what they seem.
There's always something else going on.
Hidden agendas, power plays behind the scenes.
Layers upon layers of intrigue.
And the Spacing Guild, with their control over space, travel, their dependence on spice.
And their long-term strategy.
They're at the heart of it all.
The puppet masters controlling the entire Imperium.
Well, I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today.
Food for thought.
The Spacing Guild may not be as exciting as the Fremen.
Or as noble as the Atreides.
But they are a crucial part of the Dune universe.
It's absolutely essential.
And as we've seen, their story isn't over yet.
Their influence will continue to be felt.
Throughout the Dune saga.
Shaping the fate of empires and the destinies of individuals.
So next time you're reading Dune or watching one of the movies,
pay attention to the Spacing Guild.
You might be surprised by what you find.
You just might.
Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning.
And keep diving deep into the fascinating world of Dune.
We'll see you next time.
See you then. It's like Frank Herbert's giving us this warning sign, you know?
Oh, yeah.
He's showing what can happen when one group or person gets too much control.
Right.
Over something super important.
Like spice?
Exactly. Or in our world, it could be oil data even.
Whoa, that's kind of scary when you think about it.
It is.
Yeah.
It makes you think about those huge companies.
The ones that control everything.
Yeah. Our food, our energy, the internet even.
Man, and just like the Spacing Guild, they're playing the long game.
Thinking generations ahead.
Their choices, they don't just affect us now.
Nope. They're shaping the future.
For our kids and grandkids.
Exactly. The article pointed out this really interesting thing about the Guild's strategy.
Okay, what's that?
They don't just want to keep your monopoly.
Right.
They want to make it seem like it's absolutely necessary.
People can't live without it.
Exactly. They want to look like these neutral peacemakers.
Right. The ones keeping the empire running.
But the article says that's all fake.
Really?
Their neutrality, it's a carefully crafted act.
So they're not above playing dirty.
Oh, not at all. They manipulate things to stay in power.
Wow. So it's not enough to control the spice.
Look,
They have to control how people think about it, too.
they want everyone to believe that without the Spacing Guild, civilization would collapse.
That's a powerful message.
It is. And
Yeah.
you know they're not completely wrong.
How so?
Their control over space travel, it's so complete.
Yeah.
If something messed that up, it would be a disaster.
Okay, true. But that doesn't mean they're doing it just to be nice.
Definitely not. They're looking out for number one.
This reminds me of how the Guild is shown in the movies.
Oh, yeah.
In Lynch's Dune, you get this feeling that they're distant.
Otherworldly.
Yeah, like they're not even human anymore.
Because they're so hooked on the spice.
Exactly.
Lynch really emphasized that body horror,
The way the space changes them.
physically and mentally.
Right, they become these grotesque reminders of how powerful the spice is.
And then you have Villeneuve's approach.
Way more subtle.
They're still there lurking in the shadows,
But you only get glimpses of their power.
hidden behind rituals and protocol.
It's like their influence is this unspoken thing.
It's a different kind of menacing.
But it's definitely still menacing.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
This brings us back to Dune Messiah,
The sequel.
because that's where the Guild strategy is really challenged.
Right. Paul Atreides Muad'Dib.
He's overthrown the old order.
He controls Arrakis.
He's got the spice trade in his fists.
He's basically the most powerful person in the galaxy.
And that's where the Guild's careful neutrality starts to break down.
They've always done well when power was balanced.
Playing different sides against each other?
But Paul, he's a threat to their whole system.
So what do? Try to control him, manipulate him.
Or do they see him as an opportunity?
That's the big question, right? The million Solaris question.
And the article gives us some hints.
Like what?
They point out that the Guild has a history of backing certain people.
Oh, so they pick favorites.
In a way, they nudge things to get the outcomes they want.
So they're not afraid to get involved.
They know that power's a game.
And they're the Grandmasters.
Something like that.
I'm definitely going to reread Dune Messiah after this.
Yeah, with this new perspective.
Looking for those little clues, those moments where the Guild is working behind the scenes.
It's amazing how good science fiction can do that.
What do you mean?
Give us a way to look at our own world,
Right, understand how power and control really work.
even though it's set in the future.
It's still relevant today.
Timeless.
Okay, so we've covered the Guild's power,
There's spice addiction.
their long-term plans.
There's strategies.
But what about their relationships with the other major players in Dune?
Oh, yeah. How do they navigate the treacherous waters of imperial politics?
Because even though they're supposed to be neutral,
They're always involved in these complex alliances.
manipulations. Yeah, they're playing the game.
Oh, for sure.
It's like walking a tightrope,
Okay.
trying to keep everyone happy.
Right.
The noble houses, the Bene Gesserit, the Emperor.
Don't forget the Freeman,
Oh, yeah, them too.
keeping everyone balanced.
Exactly. And the 3D Juegos article, they do a great job of explaining how the Guild deals with all these different groups.
They do. For instance, they
Right.
point out how the Guild has this long history of working with the Bene Gesserit.
Oh, right. The Bene Gesserit with their breeding program and their plans that span centuries.
Exactly.
They're another group that's playing the long game.
For sure.
What's interesting is that the Guild knows how influential the Bene Gesserit are.
Yeah, and how good their intelligence network is.
So they share information, work together sometimes.
But there's always that little bit of suspicion.
Right.
Both groups know the other one could be a threat.
So they benefit from each other,
Yeah.
but they're also a little paranoid.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
A delicate balance.
Totally. And then there's the Landsrod.
The council of all the noble houses.
Right, the ones who actually run the Imperium.
The Guild needs them for legitimacy.
Okay.
To keep their monopoly legal.
Right.
But they also see the noble houses as kind of unstable.
Oh, which, let's be real, they are.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
They're always fighting for more power.
The whole plot of Dune starts because the Harkonnens and the Atreides are fighting.
Exactly.
And the Guild knows that those power struggles, they can mess up spice production.
And hurt their profits.
So they're constantly trying to keep the Landsrod in check, making sure no one house gets too powerful.
Keeping the balance.
It's like they're playing whack-a-mole with the noble houses.
Haha, love it. Always putting out fires, trying to maintain order.
And then there's the Emperor.
Yes, the big guy.
On the surface, it looks like the Guild respects his authority.
They transport his troops, enforce his rules.
But the article argues that the guild sees him as just another player,
Another piece on the board.
albeit a powerful one.
Very powerful.
So they're loyal, but only up to a point.
Exactly. Their main concern is staying alive
Mm-hmm.
and protecting their own long-term interests.
Okay, so if the emperor starts doing things that threaten the Imperium,
For the flow of spice,
they'd go against him.
I think they would.
That's pretty intense.
It is. They're in a unique position.
How so?
They can literally stop all space travel.
Oh, wow.
That would cripple the Empire.
So they have a lot of leverage.
Even the Emperor has to listen to them.
It's like they're the ultimate kingmakers.
The power behind the throne.
And now we come to the most interesting relationship of all.
Which is
The guild's interactions with the freemen.
the desert warriors who control Arrakis.
And therefore the spice?
The source of it all?
This is where you really see how practical the guild is.
Okay.
They know the freemen are a powerful force,
They control the spice production.
but they're also unpredictable.
And potentially dangerous.
Yeah, the freemen aren't exactly known for following the rule
No, they're not big fans of bureaucracy.
or imperial law.
So the guild has to be careful.
Right. They need the freemen to keep producing spice,
Yeah.
but they can't let them get too powerful.
Or disrupt everything.
It's like they're trying to tame a wild beast.
In a way, yes. And how they do it is fascinating.
Okay, I'm listening.
It's a mix of diplomacy,
Uh-huh.
economic incentives,
Okay.
and subtle threats.
So how does that work?
They give the freemen technology. They pay them a lot for the spice.
Okay.
But they also make it clear
What?
that they won't tolerate anything that threatens their monopoly.
Or the stability of the empire?
Zigzag.
It's a high wire act for sure. They need the Fremen, but they're also kind of scared of them.
Yeah, and that fear, that's probably a big part of how they react to Paul Atreides taking over.
Right, because he's not just the spice guy. He's like the Fremen messiah.
Exactly, their leader.
And that gives him power the guild hasn't dealt with before.
Totally new level of influence.
So how do they handle that? The article suggests maybe the guild sees Paul's rule as like the ultimate challenge.
The ultimate test of their strategy.
Yeah, for centuries it's been manipulating, subtle influence.
Working from the shadows.
But Paul, he changes the game.
It's like a force of nature.
He's got this charisma, and the Fremen, they totally follow him.
They're devoted.
So the guild's usual tricks, they might not work.
Nope. They can't just bribe him or threaten him.
Right, they need a new approach,
Either bring him in,
make him part of their system.
or if they have to find a way to take him down.
The article says the guild would be super cautious about Paul messing things up.
Destabilizing the Empire.
Because he's young, he's got ideals and that religious fervor.
Right. Which could turn into fanaticism.
Remember the whole jihad thing?
Oh, yeah. The Fremen with Paul leading them.
A galaxy-wide holy war.
That's definitely not good for the guild's business.
Not at all. So they're in this tough spot.
A real dilemma.
On one hand, they need the spice Paul controls.
But on the other, his rule could destroy the very order they rely on.
So what's the play? What do they do when they can't control someone like Paul?
Well, the article gives a couple options.
Okay, lay it on me.
One is they try to win him over,
Make him see things their way.
show him that the guild's monopoly, it helps everyone.
Even the Fremen.
Exactly. They could offer him a place at the table, a share of the power.
But wouldn't that weaken their position?
It's possible.
They've always been neutral above it all.
So yeah, that could be compromised.
It's a risk they have to think about.
Do they try to manage Paul from the inside?
Even if it means losing some of their own control,
Or do they take him on directly?
which could cause a huge disruption.
Mess up the spice flow, throw everything into chaos?
Talk about a rock and a hard place. And the article doesn't shy away from the darker possibilities either.
What do you mean?
They suggest the guild might use more underhanded tactics.
Like what? Sabotage?
Yeah, even assassination.
That's pretty extreme.
Or they could support groups that are against Paul.
Trying to weaken him from the outside.
It's a chilling thought, but it's not out of character for them.
No. They've shown they'll do whatever it takes to survive.
Protect their interests, even if it means getting their hands dirty.
That's the dark side of power.
This is what I find so fascinating.
What is?
Now that we know how the guild thinks, what motivates them,
In their methods.
it changes how you read Dune Messiah.
Totally. It's like a whole new perspective.
You start seeing the guild's influence everywhere.
The subtle manipulations, the conspiracies, the sudden power shifts.
Yeah. And it makes you wonder, were they the ones behind the plot against Paul?
Do they have a hand in Elia taking over?
Were they pulling the strings the whole time?
These are the questions that keep Dune fans up at night.
This article gives us a new way to think about it all.
A new lens to view the guild's motives.
It reminds us that in Dune, things are rarely straightforward.
There are always hidden layers, intrigue, and power struggles happening behind the scenes.
And the Spacing Guild, with their control over space, travel, their spice addiction, their long-term thinking.
They're right at the center of it all.
The puppet masters shaping the destiny of the Imperium.
It's a pretty awesome concept when you think about it.
So yeah, I think we've given our listeners a lot to chew on today.
Plenty to ponder.
The Spacing Guild might not be as flashy as the Fremen,
Or as heroic as the Atreides.
but they're absolutely vital to the Dune universe.
Without them, the story wouldn't be the same.
And their story, it's far from over.
Their influence will continue to be felt,
Throughout the entire Dune saga.
shaping the fate of empires and the lives of individuals.
So next time you're reading Dune or watching one of the movies, take a closer look at the Spacing Guild.
Pay attention to those subtle hints, those moments where they're exerting their power.
You might be surprised by what you discover.
You just might.
Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into the incredible world of Dune.
And we'll be here to guide you every step of the way.
See you next time for another deep dive.
Until then, safe travels.